Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Chang, and the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel, and it's where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. And a key way that Christians throughout the centuries have made sense of their time in the world is through the church calendar. The meaning of any given point in a year was ordered by a correlation with the key moments and themes of the biblical narrative. Now, as Christians and certainly as the culture, we've lost a great deal of that meaning-making practice, but one vestige remains, and that is the season of Advent, the weeks leading up to Christmas. And this is the season that is meant, among other things, to help followers of Jesus connect to the key themes around the arrival of our Savior and King into the world. And here at Good Faith, we've been following that pattern with these traditional themes of Advent, of hope, peace, and joy from our previous episodes. And this fourth and final week of Advent, we have the crowning theme, love, and we have a wonderful guest to help us, and that is Andrew Peterson. Andrew Peterson is the founder and president of The Rabbit Room, which has published 30 books to date, fosters community, spiritual formation through music, story, and art. He's a touring recording artist, songwriter, producer, filmmaker. His musical creations include the Resurrection Letters album, which, let me just say to all of our listeners, that album should absolutely be on your required listening list. It is for the Chang family. It should be for everyone, and we'll talk about that. That's the album that brought the song that many of you probably have heard, Is He Worthy? And he just wrapped up the 25th anniversary run of his annual Behold the Lamb of God Advent Tour. Andrew, I'm exhausted just talking about all the creative work you've done over the last quarter century, but welcome, Andrew. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the Good Faith.
Thank you, Curtis. It's so good to be here.
Andrew, we've invited you here to help us reflect on the meaning of love. And I was tempted to begin this conversation in standard fanboy mode. Like, I love your music. I was especially because I love his Heartbeats. That song is from the Resurrection Letters album I just love it. But Andrew, I had a moment of doubt and I thought, is the word love appropriate to the relationship between fans and artists? At least for me, at least when they're Christians, what's the difference between genuine biblical love and, say, strong consumer preference? Should we reserve the word love for something deeper? I guess what I'm asking is this, Andrew, how do you use the word love at its deepest meaning?
Whoa, big question. We're diving right in, man.
We're right into the deep end, Andrew.
Man, well, it's very complicated. I mean, a part of it is just the weakness of English. The way we talk, we don't have enough words for it. C.S. Lewis pointed that out, obviously. And yeah, I don't know. It's like the first thing that came to mind was a buddy of mine was telling me he was telling me about how this kind of new phenomenon. I feel like a lot of young people maybe are I don't know what Gen Z, is that what they're called? Anyway, the generation where they say love you. This kind of right. Quick love you thing. There was a coffee house where I wrote a lot of the Wingfeather books. I would sit there for hours working on my story, and I would hear the chatter of the baristas, and a lot of times, they were just coworkers, but then when one of them would leave, they would be like, love you. And I was like, wow, they're very flippant with the use of this word. And my friend was telling me about how whenever somebody says that to him, he wants to answer, we'll see. Love you. We'll see. And I think that's a great answer, because it's like, man, it's easy to love somebody when life is easy. It's different when they hurt you or you have hurt them and you've got to overcome some things together, And so, I don't know that it's the best word for a fan relationship, but I mean, in a very real sense, I'm profoundly grateful for people who listen to music, and I do think love is what I feel toward people. When I'm on stage and I look out at the audience, I hope that I'm not feeling contempt, right. And I hope I'm feeling something more than like art at its best is a way of loving, I think. And so in that sense, I think love can work really well. But the real the down to the marrow kind of love doesn't really apply because we haven't really been through something together.
Right.
It's
Right.
like marriage to me is one of the best pictures of that, where my wife and I were getting close to 30 years of marriage now, and I think Walt Wangren Jr., the author, said something like, people sometimes say that communication is the key to a good marriage, and I would say, actually, that's not true. Forgiveness is. And so anybody who's been married for any length of time, or for that matter, in any long relationship, realizes that without mercy, we're doomed,
Yeah.
and so love is the only thing that can allow us to continue in a relationship.
I think you've just named, why the use of the word love is, again, like you said, we don't have any other better word for it, but is in some ways thin for this relationship between a fan and an artist, because I really enjoy, I benefit from your works, but if you do something that if you do something that I don't like, I just stop playing you. I just remove you from the playlist. There's no transaction of forgiveness there. That actually tests whether love is present there, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I've experienced that before. Like the more caustic the internet can become, cancel culture, all this kind of stuff. If I have a view on something that people don't like, then I get the meanest comments from people. You know what I mean? So it's a very fickle thing. It's not quite the same as love, I don't think.
You did say something earlier. You said creating art is a form of loving. So maybe the relationship between a fans and an artist can't quite exactly be love, but you have expressed in your writings and in your other sort of comments that your work of creating art is a form of loving. Can you expand on that? How are you experiencing or being fueled by love as an artist?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, my quote is art at its best is a way of loving.
Okay.
There's a lot of art that isn't necessarily loving, and it can be good and can be helpful. The Lord redeems all of that stuff. The motives of the artist are secondary to God's motives in the creating of the person who's making the art and the great work that he's doing in the world. So, but as far as it's in our control, when you sit down as an artist to do something, I think the older I get, the less I'm interested in self-expression. Self-expression can be, a snake eating its own tail. It's just this circular thing. And there are plenty of works of art out there that the Lord has used and that were probably created as ways of self-expressing. That's fine. But what I aspire to, and that what I encourage other artists to aspire to, is to think of their work as a way of loving people. There ought to be a person on the other side of the poem you're writing or the painting that you're painting, a person other than you. And sometimes that person is the capital P person who is God, that you're expressing this as a way of honoring or glorifying him, or expressing your anger or lament or whatever to him. So he's the one you're in communication with. But because we're humans, the stuff that we make is going to be put out there for public consumption. And I think that the people on the other side of it ought to be a consideration. And so, in a practical sense, I think as a songwriter, you can be so paralyzed by the idea of sitting down to write a song for the masses, to think, oh man, I'm going to try to do this song that's for everybody, which is really just thrown in with that are all of our weaknesses and our human need for approval and all that kind of stuff. But it changes completely when you sit down to write a song for your friend, right? Or you sit down to write a song for your daughter, or a song that's about a very specific situation because you're casting out a line because you want someone to know that they're not alone. And so that is what I mean by art as a way of loving. Like, take this gift that you've been given, imagine the person that's on the other side of it, and ask yourself, what do I want to say to that person? Not to the masses, to that person.
Can you illustrate that with any song that you feel like that was really the backstory of that particular song? Was this kind of
gift
giving that you're describing, loving gift giving that you're describing?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I could pick almost any one of my songs
Okay.
and land there. But I mean, I think the one that comes to mind first is a song called "You'll Find Your Way," which was on
Yes.
"Light for the Lost Boy," and it's a song I wrote for my son when he turned 13. And I remember wanting to write a song for him um, that was a way of, like I wanted to write a benediction, like a fatherly benediction over him as he
Mm.
launched out into adolescence. And so I remember I was struggling to write the song, played the first few versions of it for my um, cohort, sort of, the people that I will test the songs out with. And this was Andy Gullahorn, who's a great, great songwriter. And
Yes.
and I remember playing him the first verse and chorus that I'd come up with, and it was very general because I think at that time I was imagining, without realizing it, I was writing the song for more than just my son. I was writing the song for the ages. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is for my son, but really this is a song that's about this whole process, and it's about my heart, and it's all the people that go through these similar things, whatever. And he just was like, yeah, it's just not there yet. I don't know what's wrong with it, but he was like, tonight when you go home, you should sit down and imagine your little boy and ask yourself, what do you want to say to your little
Mm.
boy? Which
Yeah.
I mean is what we're getting at. And so the first lines were, when I look at you, boy, I can see the road that lies ahead. I can see the love and the sorrow. And that opened the gate to the song because I was no longer trying to make everyone happy. I was just trying
Yeah.
to write a song for, even if no one in the world heard the song other than him. That's who the song was for. And then when I finished, I was like, oh wow, okay, it worked, and this is a song that hopefully will be some good to people. But adding those specific details,
Yes.
to me, makes the song come alive.
What you're saying reminds me of something as a preacher for in my own past as a pastor when I was preaching regularly and also coaching other people preaching was, you would have this desire to connect with the masses. And by masses, I mean all the masses of the people in your congregation. And a standard mode that in preaching that you can kind of resort to that really is a cheapening of this is when you say, some of you may be feeling like, let's say you're preaching about anxiety. Some of you may be feeling anxious about your work. Some of you may be feeling anxious about your relationships. And you sort of do this sort of like smattering of like
Yeah,
trying to touch and evoke in a light way some way that covers all your bases of your audience. And I've always felt, and I've tried to coach people that I, try to give feedback to helpfully, hopefully, is that actually aim for the specific. Always aim for the specific because you'll get to the
mm-hmm.
universal if you get to the specific thing. Like the more actually narrow and focused you get, the more chances you actually can touch something universal. And I think if I
Yes,
understand hear you correctly, that's true in songwriting as well. Like don't try to write a song that,
absolutely.
oh my gosh, the masses will love. Write for something that one person will love. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually the root, the creative root, through loving
Yeah,
that one
yeah.
person to loving the masses. Is that am I tracking with you?
That's exactly it. Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
one of the illustrations that comes to mind. Did you ever see Jurassic Park? Surely you did.
Yes. Yeah.
Jurassic Park. You remember when they're going through the like how I did it kind of like
Yes.
ride, and they had the
Right.
animations of the little DNA guy, and they
Yeah.
talked about how they couldn't quite find a complete DNA strand of the dinosaur, so they used the DNA of a frog and combined it with
Yeah.
the thing to complete the strand. I was like, oh, that's kind of
I
like
have no idea
songwriting.
where you're going with this, but I'm fascinated. Keep going.
Yeah, I just like talking about dinosaurs. No, but the idea is like when you write your song, you're writing a very specific song, and the listener brings their own DNA to the song, and it
Oh,
becomes
I see.
something else in their mind than you intended, right? So
That's right.
I may have a thing that I mean by this, but then that's where the mystery of art comes in, is because it goes out. And then it's
Right.
the Holy Spirit's domain, and the
Yeah.
song is going to land inside this person in their heart and join with the DNA of their story and take on an
Mm.
entirely new meaning. And what's amazing is that the details don't matter so much anymore. The details are what got the person in the door, and then they take a back seat because the thing on the other side of the details is what's really moving them. So for I think of this band, the Counting Crows, which I loved in college. I still think they're great. But Adam Duritz, the lead singer, was always writing these really specific songs, weird, kind of inscrutable songs that I didn't know
Yeah.
what to do with. But I would make them about me while I listened to them. You know, I would grab any detail that was kind of similar to me, and that then the emotion of the song would make it my song now. And so that's
Yeah.
where the wonderful mystery of art comes in. Like I said, Flannery O'Connor was a master of this. Where she talked about, I mean, her stories are weird. They're all weird.
Totally
And
weird. Yes.
and if
Yeah.
somebody asked her, what does your story mean? She would be like, well, if I could tell you, I wouldn't have had to write the story. Like the story is what it means. And so
Yeah.
she was good about saying, there's a quote that kind of gets mangled a lot, but the gist of it is like, once you've made the artwork and it goes out into the world, the results are God's business and none of mine.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
that's hard to do, to relinquish control of what you want the song to do or the sermon to
Yeah.
do even.
Yeah.
Your job is to be obedient, to tell the story as well as you can, and then entrust the rest of it to the Lord.
Andrew, you're giving such wonderful pictures about what is released into the world that God can use when we really infuse whatever work we're doing. But we're talking about creative, musical, or artistic work here. But when we infuse it with love, because the picture I get, like you said, is like if you can tap into your specific DNA, the DNA code of love in your life, somehow that can get out and get matched up with, get synthesized with the DNA code of love that's out there, and a new life gets replicated of a life of love. It's a beautiful picture. I've experienced it in your work. It's funny when you talked about Andy Gullahorn. I don't know him at all, but he wrote a song called "The Brave One," and
Great song.
it's a song that he's addressing to somebody who's having to be brave. And I came across it in a moment where I had to be brave and confronting some hard things, and I felt like he was like speaking to me and loving me. And of course, he doesn't know me, I don't know him, but it's this sort of, I think he was trying to love somebody, and that
his
DNA
wife
got out in the world, right?
Yeah, is a song for his wife Jill. I remember when he played it for her. And so that's a perfect example. Like this thing that was meant to be a blessing for the one person found its way to Curtis Chang.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing when you think about it, and it does feel like something holy, new creative life is being created when that happens. So I want to talk more about how to help all of us create not just art, but whatever we're trying to bring into the world in that way, infused by love. If you're listening to this, you are creating something. You're bringing something into the world. Maybe it's a spreadsheet. Maybe it's a budget. Maybe it's a marketing campaign. Maybe it's a new piece of technology. But you are creating something just like Andrew is creating music, books, and so forth. And what Andrew's talked about is how important it is to infuse whatever we're creating with love, because that's like injecting some holy DNA into that work that goes out in the world and can recombine with other DNA in the world to create truly new life and new love. So Andrew, try to extrapolate from how you do that with your creative work in music and art. Is there some generalizable truths or practices that anybody out there who's creating things in the world can actually adopt and say, hey, maybe I could do that as a lawyer, as an accountant, as a teacher?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. One of my soapboxes is the use of the word creative as a noun. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about this, but when people talk about people as being creatives, I want to kind of like raise my hand in the back of the class and say, everybody's creative. There is no class of people who are more creative than anybody else. I really believe that. And as a person who like, I remember, in high school, I was voted most talented, and it was a tiny high school, so it's not saying that much. But I was always the kid who was drawing or playing piano or guitar and doing the thing, and people would say, "Oh, you're so creative," and it made me feel special, And yes, I think maybe I have artistic leanings. I like making artifacts, stuff, but when I read Tolkien's book, essay on fairy stories, which is brilliant, and it's like his theology of storytelling, he gets into this like basically argues that one of the ways that we bear God's image is that we love to make things. Not only do we make things, we bring order out of chaos, but we delight in the thing made, And I resonate with that a lot because when I'm, the struggle to write a song is kind of miserable. Like it's not super, the process of songwriting to me is the least enjoyable part. The part that I'm so excited about is the moment when you've You've landed on a song that isn't terrible after writing 20 terrible ones, and standing on a stage and singing it and watching and being present when the kind of creative energy of this thing goes out, and you see it kind of wash over the audience or whatever. Sometimes you can sense a connection. You can, and those moments remind you that you're not alone, because they have been reminded that they're not alone. And this thing happens that is like, just, it quickens me. And so the point is that the creativity is not the domain of the artist. The creativity is the domain of the human, because we are made in the image of a creative God. So Tolkien said that we're sub-creators. We are little creators underneath the big creator. So in that sense, I think it starts with just reminding yourself that you were made by a creative God, to be a kingdom builder. Like our natural state is to build kingdoms. And the question that we have to wrestle with is whose kingdom are we building? Right. And the way we're building that kingdom, or participating in the building of God's kingdom, is just by being who we are in Christ. And what spins out of that is it generates goodness and life. And so all that to say, we live in a broken world, and we are broken people, and it doesn't always work like you want it to. So the second thing I would say is, don't be surprised when the creative process is difficult. I used to think that if I'm trying to make something or realize some vision, and I'm being met with resistance, that means I'm doing something wrong. When actually, I think that that's part of the deal. It's like thorns and thistles infest the ground, and you're going to plant a whole lot of things, and not all of them are going to grow. And that the Lord redeems that, and we end up, wonderfully realizing how dependent we are on Him, and then it allows us to rejoice when the thing made has a good life. It means that we've planted the seed, but God made it grow, so He gets the credit. And so there's a whole lot of lessons that come, whether you're building a spreadsheet, or you're planning a conference, or you're a homeschool parent, or you're a pastor writing a sermon. A great example of that is I wish I had remembered the name of it exactly, but there's a great author named John Hendricks.
I know John. Yes, at Washington University. Yes, I do know John.
He's a great guy.
Yes,
I love John.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. And if you want to have John listening to whatever you're doing, because he will draw the most amazing cartoons and doodles as he's listening to you speak or whatever. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Amazing. He has journals of the sermons when he goes to church, and he sometimes posts them. They're just amazing. But John drew a chart of the creative process. It was like the arc of the creative process, and it went viral. Like, he posted it, and it kind of blew across the internet when he posted it. And it shows, like, a graph of like the initial idea, and it's this bright butterfly, and then there's the plunge into the pit of despair as you try to like incarnate the idea because it's not working and you want to give up. And then there's the turn, and you fight your way through by stages. Then when you finally finish, the finished work is never as good as the initiating vision. You've had to make peace with the fact that and he posted this, and I was like, that's just like songwriting. And then other people were like, that's just like sermon writing. That's just like making an album. And so I think, as being as someone who has a few different disciplines, I love to draw. I write books and do music. It's fascinating to me that there's this overlay. That chart works on all of it. And so the creative process is just, and that in God's wisdom, that the work is part of the joy of the thing, right? Yeah. Which is one of the horrors of AI to me, is that it's like this idea that like, oh, the work is something we need to just kind of like find a way around so that we can just end up with a thing, when it's like, actually the work is more important in some ways than the thing that is being made. Because when you're making
the work versus the product is kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Because like when you're writing a song, I tell young songwriters this, that like when you are learning to be a songwriter, there's the song that you're writing, but the real thing that's being written is you. Like the process is doing something. God is doing something to you and shaping you into His likeness in some way through the struggle of trying to make a work of art. And that ultimately is going to pass away in some sense, where you're going to live forever.
Andrew, I've never heard somebody nail as precisely as you just did the threat, the danger that needs to be taken into account of in the age of AI, that it really skips love. It really actually it subtracts love out of the creative process, because you just get product. You don't get the work, and the work is actually how love is formed, like you said, in the creative, which all of us, like you said, are. And so if you sit down, if you're a teacher trying to come up with a lesson plan on DNA, let's say, or you are a marketing person trying to create a PowerPoint for some product, scientific product that your company is putting out there, if you just go to AI and say, give me that, you're skipping the process that, just to recap what you've described in the past, you're skipping the process where you have to sit down and imagine, who am I trying to love as on the other side of this lesson plan or this PowerPoint? And you are trying to, as a marketing person, you're trying to love also your audience there when you're creating PowerPoint, and you're skipping that whole process that you need to imagine that person, love that, or persons, love that audience. You need to remind yourself that you're doing this for God as a member of the kingdom of God, and bring sub creations into it. And you're also skipping what you just described is the frustration involved in that process, which is actually part of love. Is like, we work through, like, I think that frustration in that creative process is part of the forming of love. Like, talk to any parent, like, how did you come to really love your kid? It involved a lot of working through a lot of frustration, and or your spouse and so forth. So like, all those steps that you've described, we need to really preserve in our work and not take shortcuts around them, because that imagination of the other, the reminder to yourself of for God, the experiencing the frustration, it is love getting written in us as we work. That's really beautiful. There's a part of the creative ingredient, though, that's missing in that I see in your work very strongly, which is others. And when I sort of see your work from the outside, one of the beautiful things I see, again, as an outsider, is I actually don't see just Andrew as a solo artist, laboring away alone. I see a lot of other people in the mix that you have brought in. Why is that also an important part of the recipe?
Man. Well, it's not good for man to be alone. Right. I think that there's this romantic idea of the lone artist, or the author sitting in the shack, and banging out these brilliant works or whatever. There is a fair bit of solitude, and it helps if you're a person like me who enjoys solitude, I'm pretty private and introverted, And that said,
as a surprising number of like public artists are. I've always been surprised by these big figures who actually, when you get to meet them, they are quite introverted. So
part of it is it's an adapted introversion, because I think the more public your life becomes, the more precious your privacy becomes, and so I think that could be part of it. But I just love hanging out with people. It's just an instinct that I have, to try to rope people into stuff. And a lot of the, ideas that I've had are ideas that I know that I can't pull off alone. Behold the Lamb of God, the Christmas tour is something that, I wrote the songs, but the songs were augmented so much by the community that I was in. And I knew that this concert only works in community, because it doesn't work if there's only one guy on the stage with a guitar. We need a whole bunch of instruments, but we also need a whole bunch of voices. And that to me was the thing that really made this concert unique, is that it was this community of people working on this thing together. So that became important to me, like kind of by default. And then I had other people point out, my wife and I both have had people say this to us, that one of our gifts to our community is that we tend to gather people. Jamie is very hospitable and constantly planning, a book club group, or rounding our kids up, so that we can all go to get tacos together. So we have this instinct that once your community names that, then you begin to go, is this a spiritual gift? Is this one of the things that the Lord has us in this community to do, and then you lean into it. And so that I feel like was like, it's not always been easy, but it has been an important part of my life, was realizing that everything I do is better when I'm surrounded by people who are better than me than I am. And so, yeah, getting to hang out with songwriters who are better than you will make you a better songwriter. And so, anyway, yeah, that's just how it rolls, and that's where the Rabbit Room came from. It was because I recognized the same kind of community in the Inklings. We're nowhere near as smart or talented as the Inklings, but there was similarity in the way they went about stuff.
Describe the Rabbit Room, because I think it's important for listeners to understand the scope and reach and history of the Rabbit Room, both because it's I think a great beacon of light and hope in the arts, but I think it's a model for anybody, for all creatives, like you said, which encompasses all human beings, of the need to find partnerships and community as we try to bring things in the world. So describe how you tried to, put some structure and form around that through the Rabbit Room, through Northwind Manor. Tell that story.
Yeah. So the like our mission statement, the formal mission statement, is the Rabbit Room cultivates and curates stories, art, and music to nourish Christ-centered communities for the life of the world. So the idea is that, we actually changed our mission statement, because in the beginning we had language like, the Rabbit Room fosters community through story, art, and music, which basically suggests that we are in charge of your community. We are going to provide the community that you always wanted. And that sets an unreasonable expectation in people's minds, because community is just really hard. I mean, read Paul's letters. Community is very, very hard. And so so what we realized was that we can't be responsible for being the community. Your local community is your community, right? Like the people around you, your local church, your family, your neighbors. The Rabbit Room is a kind of a broad organization that has a website. We do try to gather people, but what we've noticed is that art, for some reason, one of the benefits of art is that it grows best in the garden of community, and it generates community. People are drawn to it. And so in the same way that, like, I didn't intend for Behold the Lamb of God to be a community building work of art. It just became that. Like we made the art and then looked around a year later, and there were all these friends that we didn't have before. And so the way I usually put it is, art nourishes community and community nourishes art. So there's this symbiosis that happens. And so anyway, that was the spark of the idea came when I went to Oxford the first time and went to the Eagle and Child, which is the pub where the Inklings sometimes gathered. And the name of the back room was the Rabbit Room. So I bought the domain name and was like, I think there's something to this. And so founded the Rabbit Room first as a blog and as a way of encouraging other artists. So the initial structure was, it's a place for ideas for a bunch of different writers to share their pieces. But also there's a web store, because as a singer-songwriter, I was like, I wanted there to be cross-pollination between other artists that I knew and worked with. And so, one of the things that is hard for me to hear sometimes is when people say Christian art is so bad. There's two things are frustrating about that to me. First is, as if mainstream art is so good all the time. Like we all know that, like, you just scroll through Netflix, there's 1,000 terrible movies, right? Bad art. Right. So it's not like Christians are the only ones making bad art. Right? The other side of that is, there is so much good Christian art. It's just hard to find. It's just harder to find. And so a lot of people don't know that it's out there, because the kind of Christian music industrial complex is churning out stuff that is, has a broader appeal. And a lot of people are like, well, I guess there's not music for me. And I kind of want to be like, oh my goodness, you've got to hear Andy Goldhorn's song, The Brave One. Right. And you want to tell people. And so the Rabbit Room partly existed to try to draw attention to all of these really wonderful, excellent artists that are out there doing great work that might not get a lot of attention otherwise. Books are the same. People say Christian fiction is terrible. What they mean is Amish romances, probably, right? And so, no offense if there's people out there who are reading those books, it's fine. If that's what you like, that's great. But
Yeah.
there's more than that, right? There's so
Yeah.
many more Christians out there doing good work that is subtle and excellent. And so the Rabbit Room partly exists to draw attention to that. And so that's where the press came from. So we started publishing authors and books that were having a hard time finding a home elsewhere. And so now we have a conference that we do every year here and in the UK, and it's just kind of as a gathering point to celebrate
this is Hutchmoot that you're talking about, correct?
Yes.
This is
Hutchmoot.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
You know, it strikes me that especially when there is so much art, when it's never been easier to create and actually like distribute art, and AI is going to actually just make that even more of a flooding of the market, that one of the great needs we have is for people and communities who are acting as guides and communities of guidance for curation, because there's just too much out there. We need people to help us sort through that. And so, you know, partly what I think is the gift of what you're doing through the Rabbit Room is you're providing some curation for all of us, so that we know what is actually worth our attention and time. It strikes me that one of the ways that all of us, but maybe, you know, kind of artists especially, can help and love other people is by curation, by actually kind of gently guiding people, like go in this direction, go in there, check this out. Andrew, talk about how you do that. Like, how do you help not just point people to your own work, but point people to other work? You've talked about how you do that through the Rabbit Room, through Hutchmoot. What are other things that you've learned about through this work of guidance curation?
Yeah. One thing is to, as often as possible, share your platform. If you've been given a stage or a voice, use that stage or voice to draw attention to other people and their good work as much as you can.
Yeah.
That's not something that I came up with. I learned it by watching Rich Mullins do it, and Caedmon's Call, and you know, even the Inklings were that way. You know, they were writing forwards to each other's books. They were writing, like C.S. Lewis wrote this great review of The Lord of the Rings when it first came out, because he wanted people to know, right? And so so I think that's one important thing to do. But the other side of it, which I would want to clarify with the Rabbit Room, is that it's not just about curating, it's about encouraging people to go back into their own communities and do things like go make good work, write new stories, find a way to bless your local community or your church with the art that you're making, because, you know, there's a bit of a tension that we wrestle with sometimes, or at least I do, with drawing attention to excellent work, but without also being exclusive. You know, you don't want to be so somehow you draw attention to the good work while also encouraging people to do it in the best sense of the word amateur, which means to do it out of love, right? And so that's right. To encourage people to do it, and to take the arts out of the hands of the you know, the few people who seem qualified or cool enough for it, but to try to encourage the church to encourage it broadly. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. I get excited. Like, I think the best thing to do is to follow your nose. What excites you? There are certain kinds of art that I'm just completely unmoved by, but other kinds of art I get fired up and I can't help talking about it. So a lot of what we're doing is just delighting in the fecundity of God's goodness overflowing through his people and through creation, all of creation, whether they're Christians or not. Like, you know, there's the Wingfeather Saga animated series. You know, we have this TV show with angel.com, and they started out as a filtering software, you know, so that you could watch movies and you could take out the bad language or whatever. It came in really handy when our kids were little. But there's the other side of the coin is, you could spend so much time trying to filter out the bad stuff and pointing out the lies that certain media are telling, without also then pointing out the moments where light shines through the art. And and there's so much goodness so I think I tried to do that with my own children, you know, and we would listen to an album by somebody who wasn't a Christian. We would talk about where are the places where God's truth shows up here, you know, and it turns out he's constantly smuggling himself into the works that people are making all the time. So it's fun to get excited about that and draw attention to these works.
I love that. I think that's another thing to add to the creative recipe that we're been talking around, is just how do you, if you have a platform in whatever field you are in, how do you share that with others? How do you share that with, especially, I love that what you taught us, share that with amateurs. I always felt one of the beautiful etymological sort of little insights is how amateur is rooted in ama, you know, it's love.
Yeah.
It's like you want to connect with people who have that native, innocent first love of whatever you're doing, both as a gift to them, but I have found they give you immense gifts when they bring that amateur love into connection. One of the other things that you are connected to is a love of, shall we say, dead people, dead artists of the past, that you are in a living conversation with artists that no longer are alive. And I felt that nowhere stronger than when I visited Northwind Manor, this creative community that it's a physical place. It's on a beautiful facility, beautifully designed. Our common friend and your business partner, David Bruno, graciously allowed David French, Russell Moore, Nancy French, and myself, and our producer, DT Sloffin, and my Redeeming Babel team to do our wrap party for the After Party project that, you know, listeners have heard me talk a lot about that. But the wrap party for that we held at Northwind Manor, and we were given a tour of a particular fireplace there that to me symbolizes this living and loving conversation you are with dead people. Can you talk about that fireplace?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, Northwind Manor is very wonderful place, but it's the, you know, like you said, it's a physical manifestation in some ways. Like the Rabbit Room, we didn't want it to ever exist only online. Like you need to be able to sit across the table from people and have a meal with them, and that's where the real spark of community happens. And so this dream of having a house that would, you know, for the next 150 years be, you know, Lord willing, a place of gathering and hospitality. And so while we were in the fundraising part of the process and designing the thing, I found out that Tolkien's fireplace was for sale. And so this bookseller and collector in Michigan, he's a professor in Michigan, has an online store, and where I'd bought a few cool books, and the fireplace showed up, and I was like, well, oh my goodness, we've got to find a way to get that. So we were able to raise the money to acquire this. It was the fireplace that was in his bedroom in the house that he lived in for many years in Oxford. And so I remember the first night we lit a fire in it. We sat around the fireplace and read our favorite Tolkien passages. But, you know, it's not just Tolkien. It's, of course, C.S. Lewis, but George MacDonald and Chesterton and Dorothy Sayers and Madeleine L'Engle. And there's just this wonderful, there's an author that calls them borderland writers, that people who straddled the border of theology and art.
Are you talking about Mako Fujimura?
Well, I love Mako, but there's a book that predates him called by Roger Lloyd called The Borderlands. Came out in the 60s. Okay. And I actually do a talk called At Home in the Borderlands, where I bring Mako's ideas and this guy's ideas together, because they're kind of talking about two different versions of the same thing. Mako's talking about how artists typically live in the borders between things, right? And the border stalker brings news from the other tribe into this tribe, right? And artists are like equipped to do that. Whereas Roger Lloyd kind of gets at this idea that for too long there's been a divide between theology and art, and that theologians need artists to translate their work for the common man. Right. Yeah. So for men and women who aren't going to read a book of theology, but they will listen to an album. Right. Like, so the theologians and the artists, and then the artists also need to realize that they need the theology. They need to read their Bibles. They need to like pay attention to this stuff. And so it engages this beautiful conversation. And so Roger Lloyd points out that a lot of authors straddle that. So C.S. Lewis was a theologian, but he was also a novelist. George MacDonald was a pastor, but also a novelist, and Chesterton was the same. So there's a few artists that, in my opinion, their staying power, the fact that their works are still read, is because they straddle the difference, or straddle the two things, the border. And so the joke that I've made before with Russell Moore is like when am I going to read Russell Moore's sci-fi novel? You know, wouldn't you love to read that? When am I going to get to read?
It will involve a lot of country music in it. I think that's the other strand. I want to see Russell Moore do science fiction with country music.
Yes, exactly. That would be amazing. But or N.T. Wright's fantasy novel. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and so but then not only would I want to read that book, I would also want to read the book of theology they wrote after they had written the novel, because the novel is going to inform the way they think about things. Like, I learned so much about God in the process of writing the Wingfeather Saga, because it helps you get a handle on how free will might work, right? How I can, at the same time as I am completely loving the main characters in their story, I'm also allowing difficult things to happen to them because it's part of the shaping of their character, while also giving them a weird leash. You know, when you're writing a story, there's this sense that the characters have a kind of autonomy, right? When you're writing a story. So there's this mystery at work here that informs your theology. So anyway, I guess the point is just that the things, theologians and artists ought to kiss and make up.
Totally. I mean, I think, you earlier said this idea of there is no one body of people in the world that deserve the title creatives, that we are all creatives. And I think that's absolutely right. And at the same time, I do think the other of us non-music arts creatives do benefit something from coming into interaction and in partnership with people on the music arts, literature, all that classic definition of creatives. I experienced that nowhere, more strongly than, when we did the songs for the After Party project, and musicians like Sandra McCracken, John Guerra got in the room with us, with Russell and David and these other sort of heady people. And what came out of it was just something for me was like, oh, there's just something that is unlocked when these borders are brought down and this exchange happens. And so, how do we bring more of that into being in the world? I think we so clearly need it, especially in this age where we are going to be so tempted to an artificial creativity from artificial intelligence, when human beings from across different borders, different domains, come together to actually exchange presence, break bread together, make art together. What do we need to lean into that? That's the future I want, not the future of ChatGPT is promising. How do we lean into that future?
Man, I mean, I don't know what to add to what you just said. Breaking bread, showing up at church, and finding reasons to actually be in the same physical space as other human beings. Something happens that is not explainable. I just think that that's the answer, is as much as possible, don't let the machine rob you of the real organic face-to-face flesh and blood interaction with human beings. There's a book called Living into Focus by a guy named Arthur Boers, who's a Boers. I read it years ago and it just fired me up, but he talks about focal practices as a way of combating technology, and gives a lot of examples of how you do that. And so one of the ways he defines a focal practice is it's something that connects you with wonder, and which creation with your maker. It connects you with there's a discipline, it costs you something to learn how to do the thing that you're doing. But crucially, it connects you to other people. And I remember when he was describing what a focal practice looks like, I thought immediately of the fact that I'm a beekeeper. So I keep bees. And when I first started keeping bees, it was wonder was what got me into it, because I was so fascinated by how this works. And then it took me a long time to learn how to do it, but it requires a bee mentor. You have to have, you can look at YouTube videos all day long, but you need someone who knows what they're doing to stand with you in the bee suit and show you how to shake the new bees into the comb. And so community is a byproduct of this, right? And so, and these focal practices break you away from the chat GPTs and the screens and whatever, and reconnect you with the wonder of the given world. And I think that's where it's at.
I love that concept of a focal practice that cultivates love. And it's a good question I want to pose to all of our listeners as you're listening in whatever craft you're doing, whatever job you're doing, and by the way, homemaking, raising kids, that is one of the highest professions, vocations we have. Mm-hmm. What are the focal practices? Frankly, even as a parent, it's making me think, wow, that would have been really helpful for me as a parent to think, what are my focal practices as a parent versus the kind of distracted multitasking that's so much, sadly, I think, affects all of our, our parenting and other kinds of work. Andrew, I want to kind of draw us back to where we began, which was Advent. And that Advent is the season where we are meant to connect and deepen these themes, and in particular this week, the theme of love. What's your final word to all of our listeners on how, in this Advent season, how do we cultivate love?
Oh, man. Listen to my album, Behold the Lamb of God. Just kidding. That's a joke. No,
that's actually not a bad advice, but go ahead. I know you're kidding. No, I know you're kidding.
Man, it's hard for me to know how to answer the question without just talking about Jesus. The wonder of what he's done for us, the fact that the way that I boil it down is, Jesus is God and he loves you. That's the thing. And that, as simple as it is, was what I missed for most of my childhood growing up in, a cultural Christian context. I think I kind of vaguely believed that Jesus was God, but the fact that he would love a knucklehead like me was something that I didn't understand. And, it wasn't necessarily conveyed to me as a young man because I was, kind of in a legalistic situation. So I was just afraid of God all the time. And so learning to just delight in the Lord is the thing. The psalmist talks about how God's law is sweeter than honey from the comb. As a beekeeper, I remember having this moment where the first time I ever harvested my honey, I was standing there with the frames of honey, and my bee mentor, David, was standing there, and he was like, break off some of that honeycomb and chew on it. And I was like, it had been covered in bees about 30 minutes before that. And I was just like, really? And he was like, no, it's amazing. So I broke off some of the honeycomb from my front yard, popped it in my mouth, closed my eyes, and there was this burst of sweetness. And I was sucking the honey out of the comb. And while I was doing that, he quoted the Psalm. Wow. Sweeter than honey from the comb is your law, O Lord, or whatever exactly it is. And and I was suddenly connected to David, who wrote the Psalm, knowing that he must have had this experience,
yes,
3,000 years ago or whenever. And now here I am having this. And also I was struck by the fact that I don't often think of the law of the Lord as something that is sweet and to be delighted in. I think of the law of the Lord as something that constricts me and holds me in, and that I've got to fight to follow. And I was like, oh Lord, what a wonderful way to think of you, and that your ways, it's like in the Anglican liturgy, we pray that we would delight in your will and walk in your ways to the glory of your name. And so realizing that what the Lord wants for you is not constricting, it's nourishing. And that his law basically is for you to just be who you were always meant to be in him. And so all of this that we're talking about, the struggle of making art, all of these things are like chipping away at us and shaping us slowly into more fully bearing Christ's image in who we are, And so, and the end result of that is, I think, delight and wonder. So there are a few better times to do that than the Christmas season, because I think delight and wonder are two of the words that come to mind when we think of the birth of Jesus and the feasting that comes with it, and the time with family and all all of this. So anyway, that's the best answer I know to give. I just want people to know that Jesus is God and he loves them.
Andrew, that's a beautiful ending. May we all in this Advent season reflect on what our version of eating that sweet honey, that picture that you have, what that's like for us this year to do that ourselves, but especially also in our families and communities as we gather together in this Advent season. Andrew, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Curtis.
What a great ending to our Advent series. And I invite all of us to take a moment and reflect on our own version of that eating the sweet honey from the comb, just as Andrew shared, especially with our friends and family in this Christmas season. And in this Christmas season, we've got presents for each of you. First of all, keep an eye on your feed because the Andrew Peterson Fest isn't over. Good Faith will be dropping the first episode in a semi-regular series of conversations with our good friend, Jessica Hooten-Wilson, called Reading to Make Sense of the World. And what better way than to kick things off by diving into Andrew Peterson's beloved Wingfeather Saga. I really invite you to check that episode out. And here's one more treat, the final song from our partnership with the Porter's Gate. It's from their new album, The Kingdom of Jesus, Songs for the After Party. And this track, That We Might Overcome, has a distinctly Christmas vibe and features Doe Jones, Matt Maher, and Dee Wilson. Merry Christmas, everybody, and we will gather around the campfire with you again soon.
were torn apart. The